Good morning. It is always wonderful to follow two incredibly powerful women, Miss Sayland and Miss Thorne. Thank you very much for that. And I bring you greetings from the other America, who wants to be a part of the world community and who, yes, wants to lead by the power of our example and not just whatever Bill Clinton said, it's true. And but I have to tell you, I was really struck by what Party Leader Solon's statement that social democrats set their goals based on vision. That is so beautiful. Set your goals based on your vision. And that's what people, everyone, should do. I believe that that all people, if they're given choices and possibilities, not handouts or pity, have the ability to discover purpose in their lives. And that those who are constantly denied opportunities to live a dignified life become threats to themselves and to others around them. The purpose of my own life is to show that it is in all of our self-interest to value the potential of others for the sake of the planet. So how did I get here? Okay, and not just via plane. But statistically speaking, someone like me should not be here. I grew up in the South Bronx in New York City during the time when American cities were emptying out into the suburbs. Urban areas were often being completely forgotten. My community in particular had this incredibly high crime rate, poor schools. It was the kind of place that was talked about all the time, in the national media as the epitome of urban blight. And there was a teenage pregnancy epidemic. Most kids didn't graduate from high school, let alone go to college. And this is what I grew up in. But when my parents moved to, I'm sorry, could you move over the slide a little bit, the projector? When my parents moved to the community back in the late 1940s, there was, it really was their movement. They were a poor, black folks from the rural South, and they had decided that they were going to come up north, as many black folks did, in pursuit of their great American dream. Yeah, if you could just move it over. Thank you. They came up north in pursuit of the great American dream. And it was mostly a white working class community where they moved into in the South Bronx. And people would literally walk from their homes into the industrial area where there were plenty of jobs. Many people, like my parents, also migrated up north. And then later on, folks came from the Caribbean, starting in Puerto Rico. The real estate industry created a phenomenon called white flight, which meant that they would go into a community and tell the white families that live there that black people are coming into your neighborhood, therefore your property values are going to drop. So you need to sell your home for much cheaper than it's worth because that's all you're going to get. And then they would go to black families that wanted to locate there and sell them homes that were worth way more than they should have been spending. And thus it led to a depreciation of the land values overall in those neighborhoods. Also, this was the time when the car became king, in America. And highways and the development of them were placed over the needs of everyday people. In the South Bronx, for example, we had the distinction of being caught between two very, very wealthy counties, Westchester to the north and Manhattan in New York City to the south. And so they built highways to connect those two. And if you just happened to be a part of a community that lived there, sometimes you were given less than a month's notice before your house was completely torn to the ground to make way for the highway. The South Bronx lost about 500,000 people that way because they just had to move out. So the land value is already depreciated. You've got this crazy highway construction boom happening, which is making the land values even worse. Goods and services were being taken away from the community. Not a really good place for investment. So banks, presidents, and their people would get together and they would draw red lines on maps in areas where they were not going to make any kind of investment. And that was a term called redlining. My family lived in the 10474 district right there. And this is where I came in. But again, you've got these depreciated land values. Many property owners found it more profitable to have their own building torched. They committed arson to collect insurance money rather than try to make investments in their own community, in their own buildings. So this was the South Bronx I grew up with as a kid. And these were our playgrounds. Because again, goods and services were being moved, even playground equipment was being taken out of my neighborhoods. But it felt like a war zone, and it looked like one in a lot of ways. My brother had actually served 2 tours in Vietnam and came back home, and within a few weeks was killed because of a drug war in the neighborhood. So it didn't really occur to me that much was going to change in our community, and I left, like many other people, for a while anyway. But the history that you just saw set the stage for the kind of environmental injustices that were to come. This is a cautionary tale. We didn't ask for any of the polluting industry that you see up here to come to us, but our government, our regulatory agencies, and unscrupulous business interests were all complicit in siting these facilities there. A seemingly powerless community, and that would be code for Americans that fall on the wrong side of the tracks, race and class-wise, is an easy place to put things that far more affluent people don't want to see. When I imagine that what would have happened if we had located our power plants, our waste facilities, our transport systems, in all communities, in every neighborhood, if they'd located them in rich communities as quickly as they do in poor communities, of all colors, then our economy would have been clean and green a long, long time ago. But our dirty energy economy is subsidized by taking advantage of all the problems that social justice organizations and many government services address. The dirty energy economy has a profit based on inequality, manifested in regional sacrifice zones. And it's those same regional sacrifice zones are now domestic point sources for the greenhouse gases that need to be curbed now. Environmental justice means that no community should have to deal with a disproportionate amount of environmental burdens and not enjoy environmental benefits. And right now, race and class are excruciatingly beautiful, easy to see factors as to where you're going to find the good stuff like parks and trees and where you're going to find the bad stuff like these kind of facilities that you'll find in my neighborhood. And I want to just really stress that environmental justice talks about race and class. If I wanted to show what it would look like, say, in coal country in America, where the poor white people live, you would see that. If I wanted to show you something in, say, the Philippines, Smoke Mountain, which is actually one of the largest landfills in the entire world, it would be different pictures of that. But it's race and class as well as associated with it. But where you'll find these things, we try to do is really think about how do we approach problems that start with the civil rights experience of everyday people and recognize that everyone deserves dignity. Also, those impacts are really, they're not nice to look at, but they also have severe health impacts. We've got one of the country's highest asthma rates in the South Bronx. 1 out of 4 kids has asthma, and our asthma childhood hospitalization rate is about 7 times higher than the national average. We also are experiencing an obesity epidemic in our country. Part of it has to do with lack of access to healthy and affordable produce, and food in poor communities around the country. The other piece is that in neighborhoods like mine is that parents don't necessarily feel comfortable letting their kids go out and play on the street where they fear they're going to get hit by a truck. And we now know that Columbia University did a study that showed that poor kids, that proximity to fossil fuel emissions can cause learning disabilities in young developing minds. So it's sort of easy to see the impacts, of the problems with environmental degradation and climate change on human health. But what about the not so easy to see things, like how poverty and prisons are actually exacerbated by it. We know, we just heard that poor people will be less able to adapt to the impacts of climate change and more often the victims of it. And easily they tend to spend much more of their income on energy costs as well because their incomes definitely don't seem to rise along with the sea levels. But prison, however, that's another kind of weird thing. Again, think about it. Proximity to fossil fuel emissions can cause learning disabilities in our young kids, and poor kids who fail in school are much more likely to go to jail rather than on to higher education. And so it's interesting that through environmental degradation, we've actually created a favorable market condition to produce more jails and prisons. We can do anything if we want to. But all of us here, I think, represent the business of equality and narrowing the gap between rich and poor, protecting the dignity of all people. And I use that word dignity a lot, and I know that it's hard to even come up with a real definition for it. But one thing that everybody knows, you know what it is when it's been violated. Because we all know that poverty, coupled with diminished opportunities for employment, equals more opportunities for access into the illegal economy, increased chance for going to jails. And pollution, combined with the lack of greenery, higher stress, higher crime, higher costs to government, business, and communities in terms of stress, quality of life, and health. So if inequality is what's making things like prisons profitable, don't you think we could be a little more creative and actually make equality profitable? I think so. I got my start in the South Bronx neighborhood called Hunts Point, where we were fighting against a huge waste facility that both our Mayor Giuliani and our governor were hell-bent on putting there. I realized that this facility would have brought about 40% of the city's municipal waste into our neighborhood, even though we were already handling 40% of the city's commercial waste. But it was my dog, Xena, who actually helped me see the light, or rather the water. And it was around the same time that we were fighting against this waste facility that I kept getting these notices about doing restoration projects on this river called the Bronx River, which was actually only 6 blocks away from my house, but I'd never been there because I didn't realize that you could get to it because there was lots of industry on our waterfront. So she pulled me one day on a jog, through into what I thought was just another illegal garbage dump in our neighborhood. It turns out that illegal dump actually did dead end at the Bronx River. And after many, many, many community-based cleanups and getting lots of people from industries, to business leaders, to anybody who would listen to me, to talk to me about supporting this project, we were able to turn that little tiny investment into this park that you see right here. And it's become, over the past couple years since it's been there, a community staple. And it really is the kind of place that people just love to hang out and be in. And I loved it so much that I actually got married there. Yeah, and it wasn't just a beautiful place, for me to have my wedding, although it was. It really did spark in the community, the idea that, we were more than what, our outside people often thought we were, and that we had every right to be beautiful and to have things around us that reflected that as well. And so I also wrote a $1.25 million federal transportation proposal to help design the South Bronx Greenway and a study for it. And it's a collection of on-street bike paths and waterfront esplanades that connect the waterfront parks that we're building right now. And it shows you that you can do all sorts of wonderful things when you create a real path, for the community to follow. And so this is the street that leads down to the park. Sorry about that. And this is what it's going to look like. And we've already raised almost $20 million worth of development funds for this. And this is a little piece that leads us directly into this huge park, outside of the South Bronx. And it's about 400 acres, and I don't know what hectare is. I'm sorry, I forgot. But this will connect us to that really beautiful park on the other side of it, which is now separated from us by about 25 feet of water. But this little bridge will help us get there. And it's interesting because greenways themselves, dedicated bike or pedestrian paths, are transportation and economic development and stormwater management projects. And yes, of course, there are linear parks as well, but investing in greenway, development should come with partnerships between local and community businesses and other financial institutions and government to support financing programs for home ownership and local entrepreneurial development so that the people who were a part of the initial revitalization develop resources that help them stay in their community as it gets better and they won't get displaced. Because these kind of projects should be considered an investment in people that pays dividends. Because a poor person, if they feel like they are a drain, on society and stay on that course, they are a drain on society. However, they're a beautiful part of their society if they feel they have something to feel invested in. And so, but investing in people is so that they feel invested in something positive and bigger than themselves is the backbone and the philosophy behind our BEST program, which stands for Bronx Environmental Stewardship Training Program. It's our green jobs training program, and simply green jobs are jobs that will have a net benefit to the environment. We started this program back in 2003 where we worked with some really difficult to employ folks, people that were formerly incarcerated and many people who had been unemployed for long periods of time. And we gave them the skills in ecological restoration, jobs, everything from urban forestry management to green roof installation to learning how to clean up contaminated lands or brownfields for good reuse, and even just the exciting projects of even understanding how to be a really good worker as well. And since that time, we've learned, and also we're now working on how do we develop the capacity to do building retrofits, for energy efficiency and also solar installations as well. And I am so proud of the fact that since 2003, we have the kind of placement rate that people in my country are completely jealous about. Because at 85%, we've been able to say that we've gotten everybody that's gone through our program, 85% of them are now gainfully employed, in the green collar industry as well. Thank you. So we've made the connection between environmental remediation and poverty alleviation in ways that improve regions while supporting the most vulnerable populations in them. The often cited broken windows theory, which was actually implemented some scary results under Giuliani's administration in New York City, states that vandalism and other minor infractions of the law are precursors for larger problems and must be addressed immediately in order to prevent greater disorder. And I have a theory that augments that and takes it to another, I think, more humane level. It's called the broken branches theory, and it brings to bear studies from major universities and the practical health experience of SSB and other examples that to fix perennial health, social, and economic problems by training and employing local residents to assume professional horticultural infrastructure stewardship roles. Poorly maintained or non-existent urban greenery will be seen as a huge potential liability and regarded as a priority remediation task, just like New York City's broken windows were during the 1980s. And environmental services actually provided by healthy horticultural infrastructure play really good dividends on our investments in terms of the development of new green industries, improved environmental and public health, and quality of life benefits. Because they help, we talked a little earlier about the fact that climate is going to actually make much more common, increased and much more intense storm surges. And dealing with, if we can help positively impact stormwater management and air quality improvement and urban heat island effects by actually helping to green up as many places as possible. Really robust horticultural infrastructure reduces ambient temperature and cleans the air. It helps mitigate the effect of global warming as more intense storm surges happen. And it also, improves mental health and well-being as well, because there have also been studies to show that just the effects of little groves of trees, actually help improve self-esteem in young women. They help people who are ailing get better quicker. It improves community pride. I mean, that's what our natural world can do with us. So we need to make sure that we're protecting it as much as possible. And of course, they create enormous amounts of green jobs when they're actually applied properly. Oh, another project that we're working on, really exciting, is called Green. These are our Greenway stewards. We were able to hire two of the folks that came from our job training program to serve as the ambassadors of the coming Greenway, which has not been built yet, but we wanted to sort of get the word out there that it was coming. So what this young man is doing, his name is James Wells, is it looks like he's just pruning a tree. But actually, what he did was actually become sort of a social scientist within the community itself. As he had heard from the neighbors, on that block, that underneath that tree, one of the few big trees that we have in the neighborhood, that because the tree's branches were so low, that it was dark underneath there, and this street light, the light from it couldn't penetrate it. So illegal activity was happening underneath that tree. So he decided to cut the tree down so that the light could penetrate it, and guess what? The crime rate right there dropped. It's called crime prevention through environmental design. Another beautiful thing, in this particular case, he decided to keep the tree branches low. Why? Because this particular tree, a group of them actually, was right in front of a senior citizen center. And I think we now know that older folks, as they get older, tend to sort of isolate themselves. And this actually gives the folks in that center an opportunity to come outside and be a part of the neighborhood, because they built little benches on them and they got some shade at the same time. Also, another crime prevention tip. We also, although we got money to do the parks, we got no money to do any marketing campaigns for them at all. So we had to literally blaze our own trails to let people know that the parks were there. So this was our guys painting a green line, down the street so that people would follow it. Because, people just, if they see a path, they'll follow it. It's actually been scientifically proven. They will. So we just painted a line. It was cheap, it was easy, and it worked. And we also did a clean up after your dog campaign as well. People actually requested these little signs in front of their house. It was very cute. We also one of my favorite things to do in the world is to look around for great sustainable development models. I was fortunate enough to go to Germany a few years ago, and I saw that they were growing stuff on living plants on rooftops. I was like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. And so green roofs is a sustainable building technique that's been used in Europe for almost 50 years, where you plant a roof and with living plants for stormwater management, as well as urban heat island reductions, and because it's a green layer, it cleans the air. And so we decided that we would want to work to bring this kind of sustainable development technique into the States. And we also decided that we were going to start our own business around it as well, called Smart Roofs. So this is one of the first installation projects that we did, which is actually on top of the roof of my own house. And you're probably wondering why I'm showing you so many pictures of people working. It's because they're green jobs. These are jobs that cannot be outsourced. They happen on your own homeland, the same way that if you have, you want your food not to be motion sickness food. That was what a great phrase. You want as many jobs in your own communities to stay there as well. And so this is what our roof looked like, when we were first. This is actually my upstairs neighbor who came to survey the progress. And this is the roof that we did on top of my office's headquarters. And that was planted a little while ago as well, just to show that you can do different kinds of things on rooftop, anything from planting food, to the way that it's used in Germany, which is mostly just sedums or succulent plants that aids in actually fire retardancy as well. And not to say that those kind of low-impact developments are ever going to completely do away with the idea that sewage treatment, big sewage treatment plants aren't going to be needed, but they do, dollar for dollar, mitigate the amount of money that's spent on it. And again, these are single-use, ugly sewage treatment plants, and we want to see much more beautiful things happening. Like, just imagine if we had a chance to green like all of the rooftops. This is the view from from my office window. Just if birds would fly south for the winter, and they'd kind of have a nice place to rest. How nice would that be? And another thing, and this is so you might think that all we do is just like the plant stuff, and we do, and we love it, and it's incredibly important to have that kind of robust horticulture in our lives. But we also are looking at what do we have now, and possibly there are ways that, frankly, we can get rid of it in a productive way. One of the projects that we're really happy about is called Fab Lab, and it stands for Fabrication Laboratories, and it's a project between my agency and the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, where you link personal computers with specific design software, all open source, and fabrication machines. And you could pretty much create anything you want once you know how to handle the software. And so one of the first things that we did was we took the program into, a preschool where you'd make little snowflakes out of paper when you were a kid. These kids made their snowflakes, and we wanted to show them they could turn them into a three-dimensional object. So we taught them the program, a plain old Google program, and then they were able to watch their work come out on the other end of a machine. And they got to take it home and paint it, and they were real excited about it. The other thing that we're trying to do with this project is show that you can actively reuse some things that people often consider trash. Like, for example, this wooden pallet box. People are pulling those things apart right now and learning how to make furniture out of them. And here's a happy customer. So that, because again, all this stuff would end up in a landfill somewhere that is really not the nicest thing that we could ever possibly hope to do. And this is where it's located right now. We're actually doing fundraising to actually have its own facility. Now, a little pop quiz for you to see if you've been listening. USA, 5% of the world's population. We are 25% of the world's what? Or we produce 25% of the world's what? You're all right. You are. I think everybody said greenhouse gas emissions, and unfortunately, I apologize for that, and it's true. But did you know this? 25% of the world's population that's in prison, on parole, or on probation is in the land of the free. Now, why would I talk about that? Remember this adorable little child. Okay. And that the proximity to fossil fuel emissions causes learning disabilities in young children. And I think, and that they're often have a better chance of going on to jail than to higher education. Now, do we also know that we're building at least 2 coal-burning fired power plants in China? Mostly, frankly, to fuel America's, desire for lots of really cheaply produced goods. But many people don't necessarily think about the fact that many of the manufacturing jobs that we once had in our country are also being outsourced, which also leads, to joblessness, poverty, et cetera. And we don't necessarily think about, when we think that coal-burning, plant in China, we don't necessarily think of the impact that it might have, on the guy on the block, and his or her family, and who needs that job to support that family. Because this, prisons now, the whole dynamic fuels a pollution-based economy that punishes most the people who did the least to produce it, whether they're living in the shadow of that coal plant in China or whether they're, back in the States unemployed for a really long period of time. And it also fuels a prison economy that none of us can be proud of. So part of our work, to that end was to figure out, okay, we now know it's a dire situation for us in the South Bronx, and we know it. So we decided to do is look around at what do we have. We've got waterfront, we've got rail access, we've got a lot of recyclable materials. So we looked at this particular piece of land called Oak Point in my neighborhood and realized, and again, an idea that I borrowed from Europe as well, of an eco-industrial center, a collection of businesses that use recycled materials as raw materials as ways to, number one, mitigate the environment and make use of something that could otherwise be thrown away, and also create hundreds and hundreds of jobs. But on this particular piece of land, with the barge and rail access, it just added to the fact that this could be a really tremendous, piece of work that we could bring to our communities, could have some serious benefits for us, because we were already handling huge amounts of solid waste in the form of recyclable materials. And we could produce things that people actually wanted to purchase, as opposed to it just being, going into a landfill somewhere. But the real big deal for us was the fact that we are the poorest congressional district in our country. 40% of the people in my neighborhood live at or below the poverty line in the world's richest city. And it just seemed criminal that we've got to deal with those kind of numbers. And for us to literally look at trash and to try to find value in it was just another way for us to recognize that we need to do our part. So, however, my city decided in all their infinite wisdom that instead of really focusing on how do we bring green manufacturing and clean tech, into our communities, they decided that land itself was probably better used to put a 2,000-bed jail. Talk about adding insult to injury, but at the same time, they were also working on their huge sustainability plan. And I kind of wondered out loud many times if they thought that was a part of their sustainable housing initiative. But, when we lose jobs, and we gain unemployment, poverty, incarceration, and moreover, hopelessness. And that's the thing that none of us can afford at this point. However, green can mean multiple benefits for the same dollar if we coordinate the life of that dollar with policies and practices that help it go where it's needed the most. Green for All is a national strategy campaign that was spearheaded by Van Jones in Oakland, California, and myself that plans to use the green economy to help move people out of poverty with both a top-down approach. Actually, last year in the federal energy bill, we had $125 million in it for green job training, which was a huge, that whole thing was just a total love song to the oil and coal industry, but we snuck that in, and then, of course, Bush decided to just literally, the gajillions that went to coal and oil, and the one thing he focused on was cutting out that $125 million. But that's okay because Obama's going to win, and he's going to put it back. And then some. But also, so we definitely want to work on the federal, the top-down stuff, but also the grassroots stuff that I just showed you as well, and making sure that we incorporate, knowing that we're incorporating solutions that include poverty alleviation through policies that acknowledge and then mitigate the environmental inequities that poor communities have traditionally experienced. America needs a Green New Deal. The kind of government investment on the scale of the Marshall Plan with coordinated investments, funding, and regulations to make clean tech industries, green-collar industries flourish domestically. And I appreciated my time, in the NGO world, one of the reasons I experienced a disproportionate amount of success relative to our really tiny size of our organization was that we worked with the knowledge of the for-profit economic sector. We embraced our inner capitalists, so to speak, and in the process, learned a great deal about how to match up wants with needs as opposed to, thinking that they are actually separate. So while Green for All is a fantastic advocacy tool to get federal buy-in, to usher in that type of change, you still need people who know how to do it. And that's why I decided to transition out of my leadership role at Sustainable South Bronx to start my own consulting firm, the Majora Carter Group. And what we do is advise on how to get the most out of the same dollar. And it means re-examining business as usual and seeing where environmental services can produce savings and making sure the difference is spent on jobs for those that remediate the environment while reducing poverty. Because for municipalities, rural, urban, suburban, etc., businesses and communities, it means matching economic and social necessities on both sides so that a green-collar economic growth cycle can get underway as soon as possible. There are lots of reasons why businesses could be persuaded to support ground-floor green job efforts in underserved communities, such as large labor markets that can be trained by community-based partners, and these ventures often attract other financial investments as well. And for foundations and also investors, it means looking at their grantees to make them real players in the green-collar economy. Think giving them the capacity to focus on green-collar job training programs and policies. There's a growing trend in the foundation world to invest in communities and companies that promote their giving as ways of extending their ability to seed change. Because everybody's understanding the impact of climate, and I think there isn't anybody, with good sense out there that doesn't want to be a part of making an investment, and not necessarily for maximum cash return, but for maybe okay cash return return, but with amazing social and environmental return. And so the same way that we fought on our waterfront before as a way to heal, some of the wounds that we experienced in the past, I believe that poverty alleviation and environmental remediation at the same time is a way to heal some of those things in the future. I want to close with the fact that, many of you know that 40 years ago, a few months ago, we commemorated the 40th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. And at the end of his life, he was talking as much about economic justice as he was about racial justice in our country. And I personally think that was one of the reasons that got him killed. But when I think about the fact that he gave that unbelievably prophetic speech the night before he died, when he was up on the mountaintop and he looked out and saw the promised land, I know that he did not see millions of children suffering from environmentally based conditions. He did not see, the poor of our world suffering because of the climate catastrophe that they did not produce. He did not see people feeling as though they were left out of major economic booms in their societies. What he saw was a future that was green. What he saw, what he would have approved of, was actually making equality profitable because it would meant that it could happen in our lifetimes. I know that when I look out at all of you, that you guys are all thinking that we are tired of building tributes to our collective failures, and it is now time to build monuments to our collective beauty, triumph, and love. Thank you very, very much.
Wonderful. Dear Majora, I have been so inspired by you. It's marvelous to listen to you. You give hope, and you bring to us all this wisdom, this visionary force, but also your pragmatism, doing things really in daily life. And you have shown us how close the fight for environment question and social questions, social justice and human rights is. So marvelous. We could have been sitting here all the day, me at least, listen to you. But thank you very much and good luck with all your projects. And now we have bought from the trading market of carbon dioxide, it's a big market of carbon dioxide, yes, the right for you to emit 1 ton of carbon dioxide. But we know you will not do it. And that's good to the environment. So here from us, this emit and flowers. Thank you once again.